The night was calm, the stars twinkling above like tiny lanterns in the sky. For friends, Lila, Noah, Sarah, and Ethan were packed into a car, laughing and chatting as they headed toward their weekend adventure. They had heard about Whispering Woods, a dense, mysterious forest far from the city. The plan was simple: camp, enjoy nature, and tell ghost stories by the fire. What could go wrong? As they drove closer, the road grew narrower, the trees taller, and the air colder. The radio crackled, and even the cheerful tunes couldn't shake the eerie feeling creeping in. Sarah joked, "Are we sure this isn't the start of a horror movie?" Everyone laughed, but the unease lingered. When they arrived, the forest loomed before them, its towering trees seeming to watch. Noah stepped out and took a deep breath. "This is it," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the quiet night. Lila grabbed the camping gear and teased, "All right, brave souls, let's set up camp before the ghosts join us." They found a clearing near a strange, gnarled tree. Its branches twisted unnaturally, almost like outstretched fingers. As they built their campfire, a strange hush fell over the forest. No wind, no birds, just silence. But the group ignored it, busy with their tasks. Once the fire crackled to life, the friends gathered around, sharing snacks and jokes, the flickering light painting their faces with shadows. Lila broke the calm. "You know, this place has a legend," she began, her voice lowering. "They say that trees here whisper secrets, things you've never told anyone. And if you listen too closely, they'll drive you mad." Ethan scoffed. "Come on, Lila. That's just a story." But as the words left his mouth, a faint rustling sounded behind them. It wasn't the wind. It was deeper, like the trees themselves were moving. Everyone turned, staring into the dark forest. There was nothing there. Just trees, their branches swaying slightly, though no breeze touched the clearing. Lila chuckled nervously. "See? It's already starting." But deep down, they all felt it. The forest wasn't just watching, it was waiting. The fire crackled softly as the group settled into their sleeping bags, the night pressing down heavily around them. The forest was unnervingly quiet, as if it were holding its breath. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. She glanced at the twisted tree near their camp, its crooked branches seeming to stretch toward the sky like claws. Noah broke the silence. "That story about the whispering trees. It's just a myth, right? Like Bigfoot or aliens." Sarah laughed nervously. "Of course it's a myth. Trees can't whisper." She paused. "Right?" Just then, a sound cut through the stillness, a soft, barely audible whisper. It wasn't the rustling of leaves or the call of an animal. It was words. "Did you hear that?" Lila sat up, her voice shaky. Ethan groaned. "Relax, it's just the wind. Forests make weird noises at night." But the whisper came again, clearer this time. It sounded like someone calling a name. "Lila." Lila froze. Her heart raced as she looked around the campsite, trying to find the source of the voice. "Who said that?" she demanded, her voice rising. Noah and Sarah exchanged uneasy glances. "We didn't hear anything," Sarah said, though her voice trembled. Ethan rolled his eyes. "It's your imagination. Probably an owl or something." But Lila knew what she heard. The voice wasn't coming from the air. It was coming from the trees. Determined to prove she wasn't crazy, Lila grabbed her flashlight and pointed it toward the gnarled tree. Its bark looked almost human, with grooves that resembled a face twisted in agony. For a moment, Lila thought she saw the grooves shift, as if the tree was breathing. "Don't go near it," Noah warned, his voice serious. Lila hesitated. Her flashlight flickered, and the whisper came again, louder now. "Lila, come closer." A shiver ran down her spine. She dropped the flashlight, and the light went out completely, plunging the camp into darkness. "All right, enough with the pranks," Ethan said, standing up. But his bravado faded as the whispering grew louder, spreading through the forest. It wasn't just Lila's name anymore. The trees were whispering all their names. Lila, Noah, Sarah, Ethan, The group huddled together, fear gripping them as the whispers surrounded them, growing more insistent. "What do they want?" Sarah whispered, her voice barely audible over the eerie sounds. Lila shook her head. "I don't know, but I think we made a mistake coming here." And as the trees continued their haunting chant, the group realized they were no longer just campers. They were intruders in a forest that didn't want them to leave. The whispers didn't stop. They circled the camp, weaving through the trees, growing louder and more sinister. It was as if the forest itself was alive, and it was angry. Ethan tried to stay calm. "Okay, it's just some weird echo or animals messing with us. Let's all get some sleep, and by morning, this will feel stupid." "Sleep?" Sarah hissed. "You want us to sleep with that going on?" She gestured toward the dark trees, where the whispers had begun to blend into low, mournful groans. Lila clenched her fists. "We have to figure this out. The whispers, they're saying something. It's not random." Noah frowned. "What do you mean?" She paused, her mind racing. "They're not just calling our names. It's like they know us. They're trying to tell us something." Another whisper floated through the air, chilling and deliberate. "Why did you come?" Noah's face turned pale. "Did everyone hear that?" This time, they all nodded, fear etched into their expressions. It wasn't just a trick of the wind. Sarah's voice shook. "What do we do?" "Just pack up and leave." Lila shook her head. "It's too dark. The road back is surrounded by trees. What if they don't let us go?" Ethan snapped. "Stop it, Lila. This isn't some haunted forest movie. There's got to be a logical explanation." But even as he spoke, the forest seemed to respond. The fire suddenly sputtered and died, leaving them in near total darkness. The air grew icy, and the ground beneath them felt wrong, almost like it was pulsing. Sarah grabbed Lila's arm. "I can't stay here. We need to leave now." Noah turned on his flashlight, and its beam cut through the night, illuminating the gnarled tree. His hand froze, the flashlight trembling as he stared. "Guys, look." Carved into the bark of the tree were words that hadn't been there before. Large, jagged letters spelled out, "You can't leave." Lila's knees buckled as fear overtook her. "It's watching us. The forest knows we're here." Ethan finally looked scared, his voice cracking. "Okay, fine. Let's go. We'll take the road, flashlight or not." As they began to gather their things, the whispers rose to a deafening crescendo, turning into screams. The forest was no longer just whispering, it was screaming at them. "Run!" Lila shouted, grabbing Sarah's hand. The group bolted toward the road, but the forest seemed to shift around them. Trees closed in, paths they had walked before disappeared, and the whispers twisted into mocking laughter. "We're trapped," Noah gasped, his breath ragged. Lila's voice broke as she yelled, "We shouldn't have come here." And as the forest seemed to close around them, they realized the horrifying truth. Whispering Woods wasn't just cursed. It was alive. The group stumbled through the darkness, branches clawing at their clothes and faces. The trees felt closer now, as if they were closing in, hemming them into the forest's grasp. Every direction looked the same, twisted trunks, gnarled branches, and endless shadows. "Where's the road?" Sarah cried, clutching Lila's arm. "It was right here." "I don't know." Noah shouted back, his voice filled with panic. "It's like the forest is changing." Lila stopped, gasping for air. Her flashlight flickered weakly, barely piercing the suffocating darkness. "We can't keep running aimlessly. We need to think." Ethan groaned, clutching his head. "Think about what? This isn't normal. The trees are alive or something. This place doesn't want us to leave." Suddenly, a deep, guttural sound rumbled through the woods. It wasn't the whispers this time. It was something much darker, a sound that felt like it came from the ground itself. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, trembling. Lila tried to steady her breathing. "It's coming from deeper in the forest." Noah pointed his flashlight in the direction of the sound, revealing a faint path they hadn't seen before. "Look, it's like..." It's leading us somewhere. Are you crazy? Ethan snapped. You want to follow that? It could be a trap. Lila met his panicked gaze. Do you have a better idea? We're not finding the road like this. Maybe it's the only way out. Reluctantly, the group followed the faint path, their footsteps crunching against the cold, damp earth. The whispers returned, softer now, almost like they were watching, waiting. As they walked, the air grew colder, and the trees became stranger. Their branches twisted into unnatural shapes, some resembling faces frozen in agony. Lila couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched, not just by the trees, but by something else. Stop, Sarah said suddenly, her voice barely audible. She pointed ahead. In the dim light, they saw a clearing. At its center was an ancient tree, larger and more menacing than any they had seen before. Its bark was blackened, its roots sprawling out like grasping fingers. Symbols were carved all over it, symbols that seemed to pulse faintly with an eerie light. What is that? Noah whispered. Ethan's voice was barely a whisper. I think this is the heart of the forest. Lila stepped closer, her flashlight illuminating the tree's surface. Her blood ran cold as she saw something carved into the bark, their names. This isn't possible, she muttered, backing away. Suddenly, the ground beneath them began to shake. The whispers turned into a deafening roar, and the tree's glowing symbols flared brighter. The forest was alive, and it was furious. We need to get out of here, Noah yelled, but the roots of the ancient tree began to move, snaking toward them like living creatures. Lila screamed, grabbing Sarah's hand as the group turned to run. But the path they had taken was gone, swallowed by the forest. And as the roots closed in around them, the group realized they had awakened something ancient, something that would not let them go without a fight. The forest was alive, and it was angry. Roots erupted from the ground, twisting and writhing like serpents. The group sprinted in every direction, their screams drowned out by the deafening roar of the forest. Run! Lila shouted, pulling Sarah with her. But no matter where they turned, the trees seemed to close in, their branches clawing at their clothes like skeletal hands. Noah tripped, hitting the ground hard. Help! He cried, as a root coiled around his ankle, dragging him toward the ancient tree. Hold on! Ethan yelled, grabbing a heavy branch and slamming it against the root. The wood cracked, and the root recoiled, releasing Noah. Thanks, Noah gasped, scrambling to his feet. We can't keep running. It's like the forest is herding us back to the tree. Lila looked around, her flashlight flickering. Then we need to figure out what it wants. That tree, it's the source of all this. You mean go back there? Sarah said, her voice trembling. Are you insane? It's trying to kill us. Ethan's jaw tightened. Do we have a choice? Running isn't working. Reluctantly, they moved back toward the clearing, the massive tree looming in the darkness like a living nightmare. The symbols on its bark glowed faintly, and the air around it felt thick, heavy with something ancient and unspoken. What do we do now? Noah asked, his voice shaking. Lila stepped closer, her eyes fixed on the symbols. These markings, they look like they're part of a ritual. Maybe it's incomplete. Sarah clutched her arm. And what if finishing it makes things worse? Before anyone could answer, a voice filled the air. It wasn't a whisper this time. It was a deep, guttural tone that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Leave, or face the forest's wrath. The group froze, their breath catching in their throats. Did you hear that? Ethan whispered. It's the forest, Lila said, her voice barely audible. It's talking to us. Noah stepped forward, his fists clenched. We didn't do anything. Why are you doing this? The voice returned, colder now. You entered the forbidden place. You disturbed the silence. Now you must pay. Lila's mind raced. Wait! What if we make it right? What if we finish what's been left undone? The ground trembled, and the tree seemed to shudder. Prove your worth if you dare. The glowing symbols flared brighter, and the roots pulled back slightly, as if granting them a chance. Lila turned to the group. We have to finish the ritual. It's the only way to survive. But how do we even know what to do? Sarah asked, tears streaming down her face. Ethan pointed to the symbols. We start there. Maybe they'll guide us. The group hesitated, then moved closer to the tree. Their fear was overwhelming, but they knew there was no turning back. As they touched the glowing carvings, a sharp, icy wind whipped through the clearing. The forest roared again, and the group realized they were about to unlock something far more terrifying than they could have imagined. The carvings on the tree burned cold against their hands, sending shivers down their spines. Lila's fingers traced the intricate symbols, each one pulsing faintly, as if responding to her touch. The forest had fallen eerily silent, as though holding its breath. What now? Sarah whispered, her voice breaking the stillness. We follow the symbols, Lila replied, her eyes locked on the patterns. There's a story here, or instructions. Noah pointed to a series of marks that spiraled upward along the trunk. It looks like a path. Maybe it leads to what the forest wants us to do. The group hesitated, but the realization hit them. The tree was no longer attacking. The roots were still, and the air felt less oppressive. Ethan grabbed a stick, lighting it with the matches from his backpack. If this is our chance, let's not waste it. The flickering light revealed more symbols, their shapes growing more elaborate the higher they climbed. Each one seemed to tell a fragment of a story. A woman surrounded by trees, a circle of figures holding hands, and finally, a shadowy figure with glowing eyes. Lila spoke softly, piecing the images together. This forest, it was cursed. Someone performed a ritual here, but it wasn't finished. That's why the forest is like this, angry, alive. But who cursed it? Sarah asked, clutching her jacket as the cold crept back into the clearing. Noah's face darkened. It doesn't matter. What matters is what we have to do to fix it. As they reached the highest carving, Lila gasped. It depicted 4 figures, just like them, standing before the tree. Beneath it, an inscription glowed faintly, written in jagged, ancient letters. Ethan squinted at the words. What does it say? Lila hesitated, her voice trembling as she translated. Only the willing can end the curse. Blood must bind the forest and the fallen. The words hung heavy in the air. Blood! Sarah stepped back, shaking her head. No. No way. This is insane. We have to try, Lila insisted. It's not asking for all of it. Maybe just a drop. Enough to seal the ritual. Ethan pulled out his pocket knife, holding it up. If it means we can get out of here alive, I'll go first. He pressed the blade to his palm, wincing as blood welled up. He let a few drops fall onto the carving, and the tree seemed to shudder in response. Lila and Noah followed, their blood mingling with Ethan's on the glowing symbols. When it was Sarah's turn, she froze. Tears streamed down her face as she shook her head. I can't. I'm scared. Lila grabbed her hand gently. We're all scared, Sarah, but we have to do this together. Please. Trembling, Sarah took the knife and nicked her finger. A single drop of blood fell onto the carving. The tree groaned, its bark splitting as a bright light burst from within. The ground shook violently, and the forest roared to life. What's happening? Noah shouted over the chaos. The symbols on the tree spiraled upward, their light shooting into the sky like a beacon. The voice returned, deeper and more resonant than before. The curse is not yet lifted. The final offering must be made. Lila's heart sank as the light dimmed. What final offering? The forest didn't answer, but they all knew the truth. This wasn't over. Not yet. The ground beneath their feet trembled once more, and the trees groaned, as if responding to an unseen force. The air was thick with an ominous pressure, suffocating them. The bright light that had erupted from the tree faded, leaving only the faint glow of the carvings, now flickering like dying embers. Lila's heart raced as she turned to the others. The final offering. What do we have to do now? Noah's face was pale, his eyes darting nervously around the now agitated forest. It's not over. The curse isn't finished. We've only scratched the surface. Ethan clenched his fists. We've already spilled our blood. What more do they want from us? Sarah was trembling, her body stiff with fear. I don't want to be part of this anymore. Let's leave. This forest is cursed. Nothing we do will change that. Lila shook her head. We can't leave. Not yet. We're already too deep in this. If we don't finish it now, the curse will follow us forever. The whispering started again, but this time it was clearer, more insistent. The trees began to move as though they had a life of their own, their branches stretching toward the group, their leaves rustling with an unnatural urgency. Then, out of the darkness, a figure emerged, tall, cloaked, and covered in shadows. The faint outline of a face could be seen, its features distorted, its eyes glowing a faint green. The group froze in terror. Who are you? Lila asked, her voice barely a whisper. The figure did not respond with words. Instead, it raised one long, skeletal hand, pointing toward the center of the clearing. There, in the middle of the chaos, a strange stone pedestal rose from the earth. It was smooth and black, its surface covered with strange markings that seemed to move as they watched. The pedestal beckoned them, calling them forward. Is this the final offering? Sarah whispered. The figure nodded once, its hollow eyes staring intently at Lila. Blood alone is not enough, the figure finally spoke, its voice a low, echoing whisper. You must give what you fear most. Lila's breath caught in her throat. What do you mean? We've already given our blood. The figure's grin widened, showing rows of sharp, jagged teeth. The forest demands a true sacrifice. A sacrifice of your soul. Fear flooded her chest. She turned to the others. We don't have much of a choice. We have to finish this. Ethan stepped forward, his jaw clenched. If we don't, we'll never leave. We'll be trapped here forever, or worse, we'll bring this curse with us. Lila nodded. I'll do it. Without hesitation, she approached the pedestal, her heart hammering in her chest. She knew what had to be done, but the fear gripped her tightly, making it almost impossible to move. The figure continued to watch, its eyes glowing brighter. Lila stood before the pedestal and placed her hand on the stone. The markings began to glow a deep red, pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. She could feel the coldness of the stone seep into her skin, her pulse quickening with every beat. You must leave behind a part of yourself, the figure whispered again. Lila closed her eyes, her mind racing. She had to let go of her fear, her deepest secret, the thing that had haunted her for years. With trembling hands, she removed the necklace from around her neck. It was the last thing her mother had given her before she passed away. The only thing that kept her connected to her. Her eyes filled with tears as she placed it on the pedestal, watching it disappear into the stone. For a moment, there was silence. Then, the ground beneath them rumbled violently, and the whispering grew louder, surrounding them from all sides. The figure stepped back, its hollow eyes now filled with an eerie satisfaction. You have completed the offering, it intoned. The curse is lifted. The trees stopped their movement. The pressure in the air lifted. The eerie whispers faded into silence. Lila breathed a sigh of relief, but there was still a lingering sadness in her heart. She had let go of something precious, but the curse was broken. She had saved them all. Is it over? Noah asked, his voice trembling. Lila nodded slowly, glancing at the others. It's over. But as they turned to leave the clearing, a final, unsettling whisper brushed against their ears. The forest will never forget. The group walked in silence, the eerie feeling of the forest still hanging heavily in the air. Despite the curse being broken, the weight of their actions lingered, like a shadow that couldn't be shaken off. Lila led the way, but every step felt as though the forest was watching them. The trees, though still, seemed to whisper quietly in the breeze, their voices just out of reach, like distant murmurs behind closed doors. Noah was the first to break the silence. I don't know about you guys, but that thing, that figure we saw, it felt real. Too real. Sarah shivered beside him. I can't forget its eyes. They were so cold. Like they weren't even human. Ethan, usually the bravest of the group, was uncharacteristically quiet. His eyes scanned the forest, his posture tense. Do you think it's really over? What if we've missed something? Lila glanced over her shoulder, catching the nervous glances shared by her friends. We did what we had to do. The curse is gone. The figure said so. But even as she spoke those words, doubt crept into her heart. What if the curse wasn't truly gone? What if something more was waiting for them? A sudden rustling in the bushes snapped their attention back to the present. The noise was unmistakable. Someone or something was moving through the underbrush. It wasn't an animal. It was too deliberate, too careful. Lila stopped in her tracks, holding up a hand to signal the others to be quiet. They all stood still, straining their ears, listening to the strange sound. The wind had picked up again, and the trees swayed gently, but the rustling didn't stop. It grew louder, closer. Noah, voice trembling, whispered, It's not over, is it?" Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows of the trees. It wasn't human. It was a tall, gaunt creature, with long, spindly arms and hollow eyes that gleamed in the dark. The creature moved slowly, as if savoring the fear that clung to the air. "Stay calm," Lila whispered, stepping forward cautiously. But her heart was pounding in her chest. This wasn't just a shadow. This was something born from the forest itself. The creature opened its mouth, but instead of words, a low, mournful cry escaped, echoing through the trees. It wasn't a sound of pain, but of longing, a sound that made Lila's blood run cold. Suddenly, the ground beneath them shook, and the trees began to shift once more, their branches twisting and groaning like they were alive, stretching toward the group. "We need to get out of here," Sarah shouted, her voice high with panic. Lila hesitated, but then nodded firmly. "Run! Now!" Without a second thought, they turned and bolted through the forest, the creature's chilling cry echoing behind them, urging them on. The trees seemed to part and close in around them, guiding their path, or trapping them. Every rustling noise now felt like it was chasing them, every whisper like it was reaching into their very souls, trying to drag them back into the depths of the cursed woods. Finally, after what felt like hours of running, they reached the edge of the forest. Their breath came in ragged gasps as they stumbled into the open field. The trees behind them were silent once more. The creature was gone, but the forest, it wasn't the same. The air felt thick with something ancient, something that had always been there, but was now more present than ever. Lila turned back to face the woods, her heart still racing. "Is it over?" No one answered. They didn't need to. Deep down, they all knew the truth. The whispering woods would never let them go. They stood there, staring at the dense forest, feeling a strange pull to step back in. The hairs on the back of their necks stood on end, as though something unseen was watching them, waiting for the right moment to strike. Lila could feel her heart beating faster with every passing second. She didn't want to look back, but the whispering had returned, soft, almost melodic voices carried by the wind. The trees seemed to beckon them, like old friends who had been waiting far too long for a reunion. "We shouldn't go back," Noah said, his voice trembling. "We've seen enough. I don't think the forest will ever let us leave in peace." Ethan was the first to move, stepping toward the edge of the trees. "But we have to find out what it wants. We can't just run away forever." Sarah grabbed his arm, pulling him back. "No, it's not safe. The forest is cursed, and we've already done enough by breaking the curse." "Are you sure the curse is really broken?" Lila's voice was quiet but firm. She was starting to doubt everything they had been told. The figure, the whispers, the way the forest seemed to pulse with something ancient. It felt like they had only scratched the surface of a deeper, darker truth. Ethan nodded, though his eyes were uncertain. The figure said it was over. It wouldn't lie. But the forest wasn't responding the way it should. The trees now groaned, their branches swaying as if they were whispering to one another, sharing secrets in a language Lila couldn't understand. She looked at her friends, wondering if they felt the same unease. A sudden gust of wind whipped through the trees, and for just a split second, Lila thought she saw something move within the shadows. It was quick, like a flicker of movement, too fast to be real. The others saw it too. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, clutching Lila's arm tightly. The panic in her eyes was clear. Lila took a shaky breath. "I don't know, but I have a feeling we haven't seen the last of this place." Noah turned to face the woods, his face pale. "Maybe we can destroy it. Maybe if we burn it down, or—" The ground beneath them rumbled, cutting him off. It was a deep, guttural sound that vibrated through their bones. The trees shook violently, and from the heart of the forest, an unnatural light began to glow, a dull, pulsing red. A low growl rose from the distance, growing louder with each passing second. It wasn't an animal. It was something much more sinister. Lila's heart skipped a beat. "We need to get out of here. Now." But before they could make a move, the ground cracked open beneath them, and something huge, dark, and twisted emerged from the earth. It was a massive, blackened figure, its limbs like tree roots, tangled and reaching for the sky. Its face was a grotesque mask of bark and stone, with glowing red eyes that burned with ancient fury. "It's not over," Lila whispered, the realization sinking in. This wasn't just a curse, it was the heart of the forest, something that had been trapped for centuries, now finally free. The group backed away in fear, but it was too late. The creature's roots shot out like lightning, grabbing them by the ankles and pulling them toward the forest. It was no longer just a whispering, haunted place. It was alive, and it was hungry. Lila screamed as she struggled to free herself, but the roots were too strong. The others were being pulled in, their cries growing fainter as the forest closed in around them. The last thing Lila saw before everything went black was the flickering of the red light, and the trees, their branches now twisted and gnarled, reaching for her. The whispering woods had claimed them, and no one would ever hear from them again. The forest was silent now, the only sound the occasional rustle of leaves in the wind. Lila, Noah, Ethan, and Sarah were gone, swallowed by the whispering woods. The dark, malevolent forest stood as it had for centuries, waiting for its next victims. Days passed, and the rumors surrounding the cursed woods only grew. People spoke of strange lights in the trees, eerie whispers carried by the wind, and the occasional glimpse of shadows lurking at the edge of the forest. But no one dared venture too close. One evening, a group of hikers made their way to the edge of the forest. They had heard the stories, of course, but they didn't believe them. It was just superstition, they thought. They would prove everyone wrong. As they walked deeper into the woods, they noticed how the air seemed to grow heavier, the trees towering over them, their gnarled branches like twisted hands reaching out. The whispering began again, soft at first, then louder, more urgent. It sounded like a chorus of voices, speaking in a language they couldn't understand, yet somehow they could feel the words scratching at their minds. The hikers exchanged nervous glances, unsure if they should turn back. But something inside them urged them to keep going. "Let's just go a little further," one of them said, a hint of excitement in her voice. "Maybe we'll find something, proof that the curse is real." The others reluctantly agreed, and they pressed on, the forest growing darker with each step. Then they saw it, the clearing, the same one where Lila and her friends had disappeared. The ground was cracked, and the air smelled thick with decay. But there, in the center of the clearing, stood a large, twisted tree. Its bark was blackened, its roots pulsing with an unnatural red glow. The hikers froze, their blood running cold. They recognized it immediately, the heart of the forest, the source of the curse. Suddenly, the wind picked up, howling through the trees, and a figure appeared in the distance, a figure that looked all too familiar. It was Lila, her face pale and empty, her eyes wide with terror. She was standing at the edge of the clearing, but something was wrong. She didn't look human anymore. Her body was twisted, her movements jerky, as though she were being controlled by the forest itself. Her voice echoed through the woods, but it wasn't her voice anymore. It was the voice of something dark and ancient. "Leave, or you will be claimed," the voice whispered, 1,000 voices layered over each other. The hikers turned and ran, fear flooding their bodies. They could hear the rustling of the leaves, the eerie whispers chasing them, the sound of something huge and monstrous moving behind them. But no matter how fast they ran, the forest seemed to close in around them, the path back to safety disappearing with each step. By the time they reached the edge of the forest, only one of them remained, breathing heavily, eyes wide with terror. He looked around, expecting to see the others, but they were gone. The whispers had stopped, and in the distance he could see the faint red glow of the cursed tree, still pulsing, still waiting for the next group of souls to wander too close. The whispering woods were never finished. They had only just begun, and anyone who dared to enter would never escape.